All right, I think we should get started here. You are here for the Preparing for the CWDG Opportunity webinar, and we are really delighted. FACO is delighted to present this along with some representatives from the Colorado State Forest Service. We have Chad Julian here with his team, and let me just introduce Chad. Chad has spent over 27 years in forest and fire management working for the USFS, Boulder County, the Department of Forest and Rangeland Stewardship at Colorado State University, the Little Thompson Watershed Coalition, the Boulder Valley Conservation District, and private consulting to bring those experiences to his new role with the Colorado State Forest Service in developing and administering programs in fire mitigation. Chad oversees fuels guidance and publications, the Colorado Wildfire Risk Assessment and associated products, administers federal grant programs, CAFA, CFA, WUI, and CWDG, and providing technical assistance to our field staff and partners across Colorado. Welcome, Chad. Go ahead, take it away and introduce your team.
Well, thanks for that fantastic introduction. I've got a team on here as well. Janae Malpas, who's our Northeast Wildfire Resilient Coordinator with Colorado State Forest Service. Chaz Lakin is going to be joining us if he's not already on the call. He's our Northwest Area Wildfire Resilience Coordinator. And then Todd Lupsky, who is our Southwest Area Wildfire Resilience Coordinator, should be on the call as well. We're also partnering with FACO, as you can see by evidence of this meeting here. So thanks for the partnership that they're offering in trying to see if we can do a better job of being out front of the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Round 3 to offer some better service and be better assets for you folks so that we can have better quality applications and hopefully at that point get some good awards and bring some money back to the state so we can change outcomes for our communities. Well, to start off with, the money that we're talking about is coming from the Community Wildfire Defense Grant. And let's see, is the PowerPoint ready? We will probably shift to that if you want to shift to that, Julie.
Sure. Let me share the screen.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome.
And once she gets that set up for everyone on the call, I'm going to have her advance slides since we have a weird connection today. So just to start off with, if you go to the first slide, we're going to talk about kind of an overview of the of CWDG, the criteria for eligibility, the vision that I'm kind of trying to expose for round 3, our funding priorities and how those are kind of structured in CWDG. We're not going to have the sub-award versus pass-through. We've taken those slides out. That'll be something that when you folks work with these assets from FACO, the navigators or the wildfire resilience coordinators from the State Forest Service, they'll talk you through what those types of things mean. Lessons learned from round 2, some of the online resources we know are available, the updates for what we know right now for round 3 and when it's going to be coming out. And then I'm going to be talking for about a half hour on those topics. Then we're going to leave it open for 30 minutes for questions and answers. We also have 2 of our grant folks from the Colorado State Forest Service on the call, Audrey and Britta. They are going to be available if we have administrative type questions or those financial questions that come up, just to have those folks in the mix. Next slide. So the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program, or grant, CWDG as we all refer to it in the acronym, it's a grant program that's intended to help at-risk local communities and tribes plan for and reduce wildfire risk. Where it came from is back, if you were paying attention, prior to 2021, there was a concept called the Build Back Better. It was in the media. There would have been some very historic funding in what was being proposed there, probably 10 times what we're seeing in the bipartisan infrastructure law for forestry and fire. But even though it got whittled down and it became the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act, or nicknamed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, BIL, is what we're all going to call it, Bill. That has authorized the $1 billion that we have allocated for the 5-year CWDG program. And that's prioritizing at-risk communities that have either like high or very high wildfire hazard potential, they're low income, and they've been impacted by a severe disaster that affects wildfire risk. And that's going to be a key component on this year's application compared to round 1 or 2. A lot of folks did not show how the severe disaster affected their wildfire risk. That's going to be a much more direct core component in round 3. But it provides funding to communities for 2 primary purposes. You can develop or revise your community wildfire protection plan, especially if it's more than 10 years old, or you can implement projects that are described in an active community wildfire protection plan if that CWPP is less than 10 years old. Now, this is very historic funding. The congressional intent was to, again, as you're seeing here, kind of prioritize our lower income and more rural areas. And I'm seeing evidence of that. That what we're awarding in round 2, quite a few of the awards, and I'll list them off now so you get a sense for the parts of the state that are benefiting from the intent here in the congressional language. Los Animas County down at Trinidad, Huerfano County, where Walsenburg is, Castillo and Conejos County down south of Alamosa, Beulah, which is a community right southwest of Pueblo there, and Red Feather Lakes up west of Fort Collins, and Archuleta County down around Pagosa Springs. Those sites were much more in this low income category, so it's a real pleasure to kind of announce that I think we're meeting the congressional intent here by where I'm seeing awards go from round 2. And so really our mission with this program is to try to take advantage of this historic funding, be very efficient and effective at implementing this type of money and connecting with it to change outcomes for our more lower income and our more rural parts of the state. Next slide. See, next slide, please.
Didn't switch, huh?
There we go. Looks like it must have now. Okay, you're on second slide then. So, go back, I'd say.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. That's no problem. Was this the second slide then?
Sorry, say again.
I think, was this the next slide then, Julie?
Yes.
Okay. So the maximum amount of federal funding that we're looking to award out of these grants is you can get up to $250,000 for the creation or updating of a CWPP, or you can get up to $10 million if it's an implementation project. Again, it's got to be described within that CWPP, and that CWPP's got to be less than 10 years old. So typically folks ask a lot about matching funds when we're talking about grants, and the minimum matches for these grants are 10% non-federal, which most of us are very used to dealing with on the match, for proposals to develop or update a CWPP, or 25% match for non-federal match for proposals that are going to be implementation projects. Now, if you're underserved, and if you're low income already, that counts as underserved, and there's other categories that can create the underserved category, then the match can be requested to be waived. And once the U.S. Forest Service folks check that, then we can do I can submit the requesting match waiver once we have the awards and waive your match if you meet those, those requirements. Now, looking at the 10% and 25% match, those aren't quite the accurate percentages that the feds are giving us, because they're based off of taking your total ask, adding the match to it, and then taking a match off of that percentage. I haven't seen that before. So we have a match calculator that will actually calculate your match more effectively for you when you work with these WRCs or navigators. And in reality, like on $100,000, that 25% match becomes 33%. So it's something to keep in mind. The match will be higher than what the literature is telling us, and the match calculator will accurately verify that for us. And again, we will be able to show you with the resources that you'll be able to work with in application for round 3, whether you're going to be underserved or not. They'll be able to help you really look through that to have a better idea before you submit the application. And then lastly, if you think you're going to request the match waiver and be underserved, you still need to put the match in the budget table. And that way, in case the U.S. Forest Service folks in Washington decide you're not underserved, your application could still go forth because you're meeting the match requirements at that point. And then lastly, we're only going to be putting the minimum match in these applications in those budget tables. If there is more match than the minimum, we will reference it in the narrative, but not with numbers. We'll be able to reference that there is additional leverage and funds to match with, but we won't be counting it in the budget table because of a CSU policy where we're trying to really keep those matches minimum, especially on these awards that are 7, 8, 9, 10 million bucks. If the match is not made by the applicant and the awardee, then CSU has to make that out of the State Forest Service's operating budget. Next slide.
Can I interrupt really quick, Chad?
Yes.
Julie, I just want to bring up that I think one of our WRCs is having trouble getting into the webinar. He did register, but he's getting booted out. So I just wanted to see if there's anyone else also that might be having trouble getting in. So just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thanks. Becca, are you able to take a look at that on your
Yeah,
side?
I'll check on the back end and see what I can do. Who's trying to get in, Janae? Too.
The only one I'm aware of is Todd Lubsky,
Okay.
but wasn't sure if maybe other folks might be having issues as well.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'll
thanks.
see what I can do. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, guys. Round two. What did we do in round two? Well, the State Forest Service was not involved in applications. These folks you're seeing as assets on this call, the WRCs and the navigators, that wasn't really in place per se. So most folks applied individually and on their own. And of those approximately 40 applications, 9 were awarded for 28 million bucks in change. 6 were community wildfire protection plans. 3 were implementation projects. And I was able to waive the match on 8 out of those 9 awards. We only have 1 that's going to have to make the match. In round 3, the vision that I've got is we're trying to approximately get 10 to 20 applications instead of 40. I don't think the majority of those 40 were ever going to be competitive. And so we want to try to make sure we're not having folks waste their time in developing applications. So these assets that are on the call that you'll be working with are going to help guide you much better as to whether you're a good fit or not by some screening questions we'll get into here, in a second. But we're trying to see if we can get 10 to 15 out of those 10 to 20 applications as awards and see if we can get greater than 30 million bucks. Don't know why that's forwards backslashes there, but want to see an increase in implementation applications. We saw a lot of CWPP applications in round 2, but I know the national folks and myself would want to see an increase in implementation applications. So that's really going to be looked on favorably in round 3. We want to see if we can try to, as a goal, waive the match on the majority of what we apply to for Colorado. And so working with these assets, we're going to help guide you on where we are underserved and low income and have the best ability to do that for you. And then we want efficient and effective implementation of these projects. Next slide. So CWPP implementation projects must be for a qualifying activity. So we're not going to build homes, obviously, with the implementation project money, but you're supposed to be doing projects that, again, are listed in the CWPP that is less than 10, not more than 10 years old. And the projects are designed to address management of wildfire risk and or assist the community with mitigation measures or actions to reduce that risk. So examples that I've seen that we're awarding out of round 2, fuel breaks, that's an obvious one. DSpace work within the HIZ is something that's for sure been funded. Some Firewise and education stuff were components that were funded out of projects in round 2 to match up with some of the implementation work they were doing. So do think, about what you want to do with your implementation project. And as you work with these assets, they'll be able to guide you more on what types of things are going to be the best fit and really look the most attractive, for you there. Now, meeting the cost share match or waiver requirement, that if you have to make the actual match, our preference is cash. That's easier to track than in kind, but in kind is allowed, as well as cash. And then if we're able to waive that match for you in the underserved areas, and again, we'll be able to tell you that before you apply, what your chances are and how good that looks, then you can try to forecast, hopefully, how that project's going to come forward. Next slide. The funds cannot be used on lands administered by the federal government, so except tribal lands. But U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, BLM, all those are off limits. It's just for private land and state lands and tribal lands. The grant term is for a total maximum of 5 years. So it is quite a bit of time for you to get to undertake this. A lot of our CW or our CAFA and SFA grants are only 3 years. So there is a little more time on this one. Due to the volume of money and some of the volume of work that's being accomplished, it'd be hard to do in 3 years. The roofing ordinance is something that you have to verify. And I think most places in Colorado by this point have that. I'd be shocked, I guess, if we have a county that doesn't. But they are going to verify if you have a roofing ordinance. It's not a requirement, but it is going to elevate your preference if they see that you have one versus if you don't. Next slide. Communities requesting funds for implementation projects, they must meet the definition of an at-risk community. And the NOFO is going to talk about that you're going to see coming out here in a few weeks. And they got to follow a CWPP. There are other variations that can meet that requirement, though, like a tribal hazard mitigation plan or a FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan, as long as they have a wildfire component in them and that component's not older than 10 years old. It's best to have a CWPP, though, up front be the one that you look at. Or you can have a CWPP or FEMA-approved hazard mitigation plan in place by the application deadline. And so what they're going to basically do is if you do not have your CWPP done as of today, when the NOFO goes out, and it will go out on approximately December 2nd and be open for a minimum of 90 days until late February. It may be open a little longer than that, open than 90, we're not sure yet. As long as you get your CWPP signed off by the time the NOFO goes out, then we'll be in good shape. Was that correct, Janae? I know we've had some discrepancies about this. The NOFO your CWPP has to be signed right before the NOFO goes out, or is it that it can be signed before the end of the NOFO period?
No, it needs to be signed and completed prior to the release of the NOFO.
Okay, so hopefully folks have that clarification. If you do have a CWPP in progress, you'd need it signed probably right before December 2nd, or it won't count for you to have a CWPP that's signed to then apply with. Next slide. So the priority questions as to how they're going to prioritize whether or not you meet the eligibility criteria here. The first question that we're going to ask you when you work with these assets, the WRCs or the navigators from FACO, is does the project benefit a low-income community? If it does, that's 10 points. If it does not, that's 0. There's not a gradation of points anywhere in between there. And how we're going to verify that, that's where it's going to be critical to work with our assets that are on this call. There are discrepancies currently in the tool that we've alerted the Washington, D.C. office. If you search via the county view or the city view, they will not match up in most ways at all. You'll have very big discrepancies as to what your low-income polygons are. We've again brought that to their attention. Whether they will have that fixed before the NOFO goes out on December 2nd or not, I don't know. I sure hope they do. If they do not, we will have to proceed with picking the more colorful option that shows low income and at least defending using their tool that they'll have to accept that if the tool isn't fixed and there's discrepancies within the tool. So we have some links on this site right here, the guidance document that'll have these assets that'll be working with you. They'll have those as well. And so it'll help to understand whether we're meeting that low income, designation or not. Next slide. Second question is, has this community been impacted by a severe disaster? COVID-19 does not count. I saw that on other applications from round 2. It has to be a severe disaster that's related to more natural resource type events, drought declarations, wildfire declarations, flood declarations, insect and disease declarations. Those are very straightforward, and it's very clear to see why they count. Again, these assets will help you understand if the declaration's something we want on the application or not. And then if it is, we've got to answer the question of how does it affect your wildfire risk. So say, for instance, if you had a flood, insect and disease, mountain pine beetle declaration, that would be very easy to show how it's increasing wildfire risk and why you're doing projects to maybe mitigate that. If it's wildfire flooding, you're going to have to be more innovative to show how does it then increase the risk if, say, the area is burned off in a wildfire, or the area has been flooded and vegetation's changed that way. So again, the resources on the call will work with you to think about how you answer this when they screen with you, when you have your first meeting with them up front. Next question, next slide. And the third one, and this one's a real key one here. Does the project location have wildfire hazard potential? You notice they do not say risk here. They chose the word hazard. So can a high elevation site in spruce fir that's low probability of risk of ignition fit for high wildfire hazard potential? Yes. So for our Western Slope partners, like Lilia Falk and others, do think about looking for areas that you would normally not think have a lot of risk in them. And we're looking for hazard potential here. There are some products in CORA that I built, one in particular, for high elevation spruce in non-WUI areas on the Western Slope to be able to show higher risk. So our assets that you'll work with will know about those tools, and we'll have the CORA pre-approved as well as the wildfirerisk.org tool with the CWDG folks, so we can use either as to which ones to better our advantage. Now, if you answer yes on this, you get 20. If you answer no, you get 0. On the previous question, it was 10 yes and 0 no. And so if on these first 3 questions, you answer yes to everything, you're going to have 40 points. If you answer no, you're going to have 0. And that right there tells us whether you need to move forward or not. If you're answering no to all 3, there's really no structural way you will ever compete in this program. If you're answering yes to all 3, it's very clear to proceed. If you're answering 2 out of the 3 or 1 out of the 3, then that's where these assets are going to have to evaluate with you. And what that would mean is you cannot make any mistakes on the rest of the application. You're only answering 1 out of those 3 or 2 out of the 3. What they did in round 2 is for implementation projects, you had to score 87 out of 100 or higher to get funded. And for CWPPs in round 2, I think it was 78 out of 100. For round 3, the implementation will still stay 87 out of 100. And I believe the CWPP is going to go back up to the upper 80s out of 100. So you can only miss 13 to 14 points. And if you miss more than that, you will not get funded. That's why we're using these 3 screening questions up front, because of their 40-point total. Next slide. And so on this one, the funding priorities, the national program managers have concurred that a competitive application, you generally got to answer yes to all 3 of those questions. We've asked them on a few meetings if that's the case. And so if you can, that's you're starting at 40 points. If not, you're starting at 0. So that's, I think, fairly clear cut. Next slide. The U.S. Forest Service is the administrator, and they're the ones that are, giving the money, but CSU is going to manage for the Forest Service in this instance. We've got a contract with them to manage it for Colorado. CSFS is going to manage the awards and bring some technical staff like myself and field staff that can help with technical components of these projects and layout and, reimbursements and all that stuff. We've got finance folks that are fabulous in our agency as well that are on this call that'll be great assets to help you, with reimbursements and hopefully faster than what the feds can do. The issue that's come up, though, is there are going to be times where CWDG rules that you see in marketing materials from the national stuff with the U.S. Forest Service, we're going to have a little some tighter rules in places than what those rules are in the marketing materials because we're following Colorado State University's policy. An example of one of those that I want to make sure folks know about is advance payments. It says on the national marketing materials those are allowed. Those will not be allowed through CSU's system. And so that's something to think about up front when you apply. If you're applying for 10 million and you have an operating budget annually of 100,000, there's no structural way you're going to expend funds for reimbursement. So think about the ask you're going to be asking for, and is it within your financial capability to spend the funds and then get reimbursed? Because again, advance payments are not going to be allowed on this. Next slide. And so some lessons learned from round two. Again, the financial capacity for reimbursement grants. What I do not want to do is I want to meet the congressional intent here on and get, and have more of our priorities go to lower income, smaller organizations and more rural parts of the state. But I do not want to discriminate if they don't have the money to outlay the capital and do the work before we reimburse them. So it's not that we're going to say you can't apply. We're just going to have our assets work with you to lower your ask to make sure it's more reasonable if you don't have a lot of money to do that work up front. We got to make sure the targets are attainable. I've already had to change some targets from round two, some as much as up to 80%. That's something we got to really make sure we are looking at closely as we apply for round three, that the targets and what we're saying we're going to do, we have the ability to do, the financial capability to do it, and our assets will help you think through that when they're meeting with you. Equipment purchases, they're allowed, but they better be in the budget table, in the equipment section. They better be in the budget narrative. They better be in the frameworks that I'm developing if we are going to award it to you. And we got to get pre-approval for those things. So if it is allowed, but again, do not think about just equipment as something willy-nilly here where you can go just purchase. There will be a lot of rules in place to do it. So work with our assets as you're developing those applications to make sure that's accommodated. Beginning work prior to the award. Go back one slide. Beginning work prior to the award. That's allowed in the national marketing materials from the Forest Service, but we did run into that problem when we tried to award things here in round two. It's not a good idea to ever be doing work prior to any kind of signed document. And so if that's something that you think you're going to be doing, you would want to let these applicants know that when they're developing the application for you, so that we can try to accommodate that. The time frame to think about from application to award, it's a full year, folks. You will not be doing any work quicker than 1 year from when you turn this application in February. So what I mean by that is about 8 months after you turn this application in, you will see a national press release like we did for round two. Disregard that press release, please. That is not your award notification. That just gives you some ability to sleep more comfortably at night, knowing that you are going to get an award, but it's going to take some time. For round two, it took us 4 months to get under award with the U.S. Forest Service once that press release came out. So that's why I'm anticipating a full year at a minimum from when we apply to when you may potentially get that award to begin work. There are resources to assist in application development. We're ramping that up for round three. So there are 3 wildfire resilience coordinators with the State Forest Service and 2, if not more, navigators with Fire Adapted Colorado that are going to be available. We're going to be working on, as the NOFO releases, how the procedure with how you contact them. That is not outlined completely yet, but we'll have the next few weeks to get that lined out before December 2nd. My expectation is that you will have to meet with one of those resources before I will give you the key to do an upload for the application. We want to make sure we have a good set of eyes looking at these kind of issues so that if these things do get awarded, we don't have management hurdles and nightmares at the State Forest Service in trying to award these. And then lastly, match confusion. There is a lot of confusion about the percentage. We have that match calculator tool. That's why we're going to be your more effective assets. To do that, if you follow the percentages in the national marketing materials, you will underestimate your match by 6%. So make sure to use those resources and they'll be able to calculate that more accurately for you. Next slide. So there's some online resources that we have in this PowerPoint. Again, these assets that are going to be out there working with you are going to have access to these and understand these tools and be able to hopefully guide you really well if you use them. But there are some wildfire risk to community tools. That's what we're primarily going to use for CWDG in Colorado, because that's what our reviewers and checkers are using. So we feel it's in our best interest to use the same tool instead of other things. Now, there may be instances where we use the CORA data set from the Colorado State Forest Service. And again, I'll have that pre-approved, but we're predominantly going to use the wildfirerisk.org tool so that we can make sure we match up and be more accurate with you folks as to what the reviewers back there are going to look at as well. The Colorado Forest Atlas, where we may end up using that if we use some of these layers in more unconventional areas like spruce fir and other areas on the western slope. There is a climate and environmental justice screening tool. There's a FEMA tool, and those types of things help with underserved. And then you can look back to grants from round 1 and round 2. I believe those are publicly available, and you can look at them with the contact information redacted out. Next slide. So round 3 updates. So the round 3 NOFO. They have not set a date yet. I was in the meeting 2 days ago. We do a weekly meeting with Community Wildfire Defense Grants. They are saying it will be in the next few weeks, but they have not gotten the application approved from Office of Management and Budget yet. That's what they're working on currently. It's looking like it's tentatively going to be December 2nd at this point, based on our meeting 2 days ago. But again, just watch for that. They may end up releasing it during the week of Thanksgiving when we're all off. We will not be here to take calls during that time. We won't be back till December 2nd. So if they choose to release it during that week, just hang tight till the first week of December when we're all back. Expect 90 days will be the minimum that this window will be open. I think they're trying to make sure they can accommodate some current CWPPs that are being developed now, and that's why they're pushing this back. But they are going to have it open a minimum of 90 days, which puts it at late February. And again, we'll just see that press release like you all will here soon, most likely at the very end of November or right around December 2nd. Now for round 3 for the State Forest Service and our role in it, and with the FACO navigators and our resilience coordinators, you will need to contact, and we will send an email out to folks who have been on this call and many others around the state for a procedure for how to do that and notify these folks you're interested. We just haven't developed all those rules yet. And you will be required to meet with those folks. They're going to have a lot of training to help you navigate the CWDG thing. I've been studying it for months. So we're hoping we're going to have a lot more expertise than we did in round 2 to offer as services for folks, and hopefully get a lot more money back to the state, you know, with the resources we're bringing to the table. Next slide. So if you're interested in applications, here are going to be the ways you're going to do it once we outline the procedures. If you're in the Northeast area, primarily, you're probably going to try to contact Janae Malpas. She's on the call. And at the very end here, we can have them introduce themselves when I finish speaking. The Northwest area, Chaz Lakin is going to be one of our more primary contacts there. The Southwest area, Todd Lubsky, will be the primary contact. In the Southeast area, I'm going to have the navigators from Fire Adapted Colorado be more the priority there. I'm expecting maybe a higher number of applications from the Southeast area compared to the other 3. So we will have some of the resilience coordinators from the other areas help in the Southeast area if their workload is really high, which it potentially could be. The Fire Adapted Colorado navigators we're working with right now, Rebecca Samolsky, who's their director and who's on the call, and then Julie Klett, who set this meeting up. and will be also a navigator as well. They may be able to tap into some other resources, but right now those are the two that are assigned. Next slide. That's all I've got. I'm on time, I think, at a half hour. So we are going to open it up for questions. We've got a lot of folks that can answer those. The resilience coordinators, the fire adapted Colorado navigators are on. And I believe our admin folks in finance are on from the State Forest Service. So I'll turn it back over to Julie, and we'll, I guess, move towards questions.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you back. Sorry about the thing, my finger pad. I think that my force is really high today. The finger pad kept jumping around on me. So at any rate, yeah, how are we doing with questions, Becca?
So we've had a few come in the chat, but Janae's been doing a really good job of keeping up with those. I think it might be worth reflecting back on a couple of those regarding timeframes. You know, there was a question about how long it takes to get reimbursements, and Britta with State Forest Service that processes those says it could take about 3 weeks if everything is coming in with all of the details that they need when they get them. So I would love to know. Just wanted to vocalize that, and that's really exciting. I do think that there's more capacity than you guys have had in that section for a while. So maybe you can speak to that as well, Audrey, because I think that might have astounded a few people to read that in chat. If Britta or Audrey want to jump in on that.
Yeah, I can jump in. And yeah, we do have additional staff capacity on our grants team. And so the goal is to turn it around within 3 weeks. But it's important to note that before our team even reviews a packet, the forester and also Chad have to review the work on the ground and also sign off on the packet. So we have a couple levels of approvals that have to happen. And, you know, that takes time because, you know, there's people who have, you know, other work lives and vacations and things like that. So we want to acknowledge that that's all based on people's availability, but we do try to turn it around as fast as we can. And then once we receive it and get it over to CSU, just with their check cycles and our own internal approval processes and mail, you know, when a check is mailed from Fort Collins out to wherever you're at in Colorado, it can take, you know, maybe up to 5 days. So that's in an ideal scenario, and also based on if CSU is closed, like we are for a week in Thanksgiving, you know, if we got a reimbursement next week, we can't process that until, you know, December. So I think allowing some buffer for that, and that's important to know.
Thank you. And then there was another really great question from West Region Wildfire Council. And yeah, feel free to keep putting them in the chat and also raise your hand as Josh has. So we'll get to you in just a second, Josh. There was also a question that Lilia asked regarding if you're in a county that as itself is not low income, but there's a community with the CWPP that is low income within that county. And Janae responded, no, I don't think that will qualify, but can we add in there? Because I do think that there's some more space in the application now than there has been in the past.
Let me think about, would you reference that question again, Becca?
Yeah, so the question is, and I can give a little bit of navigator direction here as well, and you chime in on this, Chad, that the question is, if you're in a county that is not showing up low income, I'm guessing this is like San Miguel with Telluride potentially, but there's a neighborhood that has a CWPP that is outside of the wealthy area, right? A low income community within said county, because we've got such large census tracts. My understanding was that they have added the opportunity to, you can put a description in, there's a narrative place. So you could still say, yes, I'm low income. It's not showing up right on the tool. Here's why we think that is wrong. But I don't know what influence that is going to have or not on whether or not they still mark you as low income.
I guess my gut tells me immediately when I heard that question that where the project work on the ground is going to occur, that footprint needs to be low income.
This is
And
Okay,
so,
can I just clarify? Sorry, I typed it out, but I think just stating my question. And Becca, you're exactly right. San Miguel County
yeah,
has pretty diverse economics.
based on a lot of geography. The county itself is not considered low income, but within that county, there are jurisdictions like Norwood, like Egner, that are very much low income. And if we're
Yeah.
talking about a county CWPP revision, where would that fall?
You know, that's a good question, and I can take that question back to our weekly CWDG meetings. I better get better clarification on that. That's got some, yeah, I can get clarification on that. And if we have an avenue to get answers back to folks that were on this call, we'll be able to get that information back out.
And I'm gonna gut check that one on you, Lilia, that's the count. If you're going at the whole county scale, I think you need to be looking at the whole county.
Probably.
In
Okay.
that situation.
Good to know.
Other questions?
Let's go. I think Josh had his hand up next.
Yeah, hey, thanks, y'all. Josh in Larimer County, and Chad, Janae, Fired at the Colorado, and everybody else who helped to put this webinar on. Look, really appreciate the good info here and all your efforts to help all of us be successful with competitive proposals. So, and certainly, Janae, Chad, we look forward to working with you guys on a round 2 award. And with that, before I ask my question, I'll just tone out. If someone would like some insight or advisement that we might be able to, provide, we're happy to help others too, and and help our neighbors here in the great state of Colorado. So anyway, appreciate y'all's time. The question, I really have 2 questions. I don't know if I'm limited to just one at a time. So, but the first one is in round 2, I was under the impression that the project areas had to be within a current less than 10 years old CWPP, but I could have swore I saw something on the slides where you referenced maybe a local hazard mitigation plan.
Yes.
If that's current and in place, that would suffice as well.
Yes.
Is that accurate?
The local hazard mitigation plan would, if it's a tribal one or a FEMA one, but that's also got to be 10 years old or less as well.
Okay.
The
Yep.
date's the same, yeah, no matter what you're looking at, 10 years or less.
Yeah, good copy. Thanks for that clarification, Chad. And then the second question, with, and this might be a little bit, more challenging to answer, but when you spoke about, CWDG rules versus CSU rules, totally get the advanced payment thing, but I mean, that could be a lot of other nuance as well. And so just wanted to see if you could offer maybe a few other examples where CSU rules would trump CWDG rules, if you have any examples.
I don't think at the moment I have too many other examples other than just the press release that came out last May. It said you could do work starting then until you signed your award. We did run into some hurdles with that in round 2, trying to award those with some folks that had done that work prior to signing the award. So that's where normally our rules would not allow any work prior to an award. And in my career, that's how it's always been too. So even though that's in the national marketing materials, it's just not a good idea to be doing work from that press release till we get that award signed, because of the rules we just described that could differ a little bit. You wouldn't be aware of those and could make some mistakes without having any bad intent. So that's our preference. That doesn't mean you can't do work, but if you think that you're going to want to do that, that's where you're going to want to work with us, and stay in communication, do in this application phase. And then as we get that press release, you'd want to call me immediately at that point and say, hey, I'm thinking I want to do some work before the award's signed, before you do it, so we can get that in place.
Yeah, got it. Thanks again, y'all.
Yep.
Thanks. Let's go to Brian, and then I'm going to go to one in the chat after that. We'll pop back and forth there.
Hey, good afternoon. I also have a few questions. Maybe we'll take Josh's lead, throw out 2 questions, and then I'll post my other ones in the chat. Appreciate all the info. Another nuance to the low income eligibility. So I'm in Jefferson County. We do not, and we're looking at a county-wide proposal for implementation. Low income, we don't apply, we don't, score for that from a county perspective, nor I think can I even find communities within our county that are going to meet that criteria. However, half of our county is primary watersheds that serve a lot of other adjacent counties that certainly are low income. And so I know that's a stretch and it's a nuance, but when we're talking about 0 points or 10 points and nothing in between, is it even worth our time to try and explain that and nuance that and make that case? Or, you know, is that out of the realm what to get altogether? And at that point, I've only got, 3 points that I could give to possibly get the 87-point score. It seemed that all or nothing just seems like a huge stretch, and not recognizing the severe impacts of adjacent counties that are impacted by lands that we manage.
Well, can I add one thought to this, and then Chad or whoever chime in? But I want to just say no, but I also don't want to just tell you no. And one of the things that's changed since last round that I might have just missed it, but they prioritized CWPP development in the second round a little bit more in order to try to get to a place where we had more current CWPPs who are ready to go for implementation in these next rounds. And what that did was that allowed them to kind of maybe get a few communities that didn't meet all 3 qualifications to get through that CWPP phase. Because the scores that were kind of winning application scores came down a little bit, right? The number where they were starting to vet those was a little bit lower. That's going to be back up again this round, including for CWPPs, which is going to make it that much harder. However, I think there's a lot of capacity. You guys could probably do really well on writing a lot of the rest of the grant, right? And make that case in narrative form. And so the biggest one, as far as those 3 categories that if you're missing is going to be really a struggle, is if you're not showing up as high risk in any way that you can get those 20 points, right? Because the low income or the disaster are each 10. So that was my thought, but please add anything.
Yeah, I mean, the other 2, kind of pass fail almost type questions with those points. It's a no-brainer for us, for our county. It's just the low income piece. But I think there's an argument to be made, but I don't know if it's a strong enough argument. It's an all or nothing point value. Sorry, Chad, go ahead.
I appreciate your question, Brian. I have not been asked that question yet by anybody in this entire process. I like your thinking. I'm definitely going to make some calls with that question and inquire. How about that? So I think there's a case to be made. Now, whether they would be open in like round 3 to changing anything, probably not. But I bet we could get them more interested by round 4 to maybe look at that a little differently, because I like your line of thinking that you are affecting a lot of low income areas by the risk you have and the associated fire outcomes that can be negative, So I'll inquire about that. But my guess is probably where Rebecca is right now for round 3. I bet that would probably not be something that could change. But
and there has been a lot of feedback for sure that the all or nothing is kind of ridiculous. And since the first round when that happened, however, it didn't change round 2. And as far as I've heard, I haven't heard anything about that changing in terms of what the scoring process is going to be for round 3. But, there's definitely still a lot of pressure we would like to keep putting on that one as well, in terms of the all or nothing. Did you have another one, Brian?
Yeah, so this one, and if it's too complex and nuanced, I don't want to monopolize the time, but so the other question for us, for the county, we're putting together a proposal, implementation again. We're going to be asking funding largely to hire staff and buy equipment to do implementation and to build programs tied to our CWPP, which our county commissioners just approved last week. So a lot of action items, there's a lot of tie-ins and all that kind of stuff. It's doing work on the ground, it's building the programs and all that kind of stuff, but it's not necessarily contracting the work out. We've got project areas identified, priorities, working with our fire protection districts, their CWPP priority areas, all that kind of stuff. Does that fit this model because I don't want to, I mean, it's going to be a huge investment. I think we'll be strong minus the low income piece and can make a really solid case, but I just want to make sure it fits before we invest the effort.
Yeah, hiring staff and purchasing equipment, totally allowable under this. And I've seen a lot of awards where folks are doing that out around too, like Beulah is one good example. So
Right.
yeah, that totally fits with how I've seen and have studied this over the last few months.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks. I'll put my other questions in the chat.
Thanks. And I said we go, I think this will be a quick one from the chat. Community eligibility and scoring information questions. There's somebody asking, is that the same, the low, okay, we just got another question, so I missed it. Maybe you just answered it, Janae. Our community showed we were eligible to apply for cost share. Is it the same as the low income? No, and somebody else explain.
So yes, I'll take this one here. It is confusing. The underserved and low income. Here's the way I've been educated on it from Hallie with our weekly CWDG meetings. If it's low income, it automatically then becomes underserved. But if it's underserved, it doesn't become low income. That doesn't mean it's low income. There are other categories that can come together to create the underserved category. Low income is just one category of many that does that. So again, if you're low income and you see that, you're automatically going to be underserved. But if you're underserved, that doesn't mean you're low income.
And
because it could be elderly population that everyone's over 65 and they have a hard time getting out of this community in a fire. That would meet the, some of the core requirements for underserved, for instance. So,
and then those factor into two different parts of the applications, right? So underserved, I believe, factors into your 10 points or none on the communities we're trying to reach. Low income would also, that it's only the low income piece that would give you that match waiver. So you can be underserved and not have the match waiver. Am I missing other pieces of the application that's relevant too?
No, Rebecca, it was kind of, I think, just the opposite.
Okay.
So yes, if you're underserved, you get the match waiver. You can request it. If you're non-underserved, so if you're low income, you can automatically apply for the underserved and match waiver. If you're not low income, you still can apply for the match waiver and be underserved by other categories composing that underserved status. Low income is just one of many. It's not the sole one that does it. So is that clear for everybody? I know it's kind of confusing with the low income and the underserved. And again, our assets that will work with you will be trained fully by that point to understand that clearly. So.
Yeah, I said it wrong. We haven't seen how it's rolled out in the application this year, so it's been a little bit one. Sorry.
And until that application and NOPO comes out, we are theorizing some things could change. Doesn't appear yet, but we got to have a heads up that could happen. So,
Jim.
Sorry about that. It's sort of the similar question that's already been brought up. And we talked about Larimer here and Jeffco and Boulder, and it goes down to Douglas and El Paso and Summit and Eagle. If you're a county that's not low income, and so countywide projects or things, even if portion of the county is not high risk, but most of the county is high risk. I mean, if you look at Larimer, Jeffco, Boulder, El Paso, Douglas, we've got a lot of high risk in the county, not low income. Understand, purpose for low income funding for this, but are those counties excluded? Or, some of that clarification, same as Lilia's question, a little bit different than CWPP. This is project-based stuff, just the same questions as Jesco and Larimer for Boulder, and probably a lot of other counties that don't qualify for them.
So Jim, as long as your footprint, and there are footprints in Boulder County, like Boulder Canyon, for instance, that would have low income, as long as your project that's implementations in a low income polygon, that's how you're going to thread that needle in these front range counties.
But if you have a countywide, if you have staff or equipment or countywide programs, you can't just stop, at the boundary. So if your project can only be in the footprint of a low income
Yes.
area. If you have a countywide program, if you have staff, if you have equipment, that's going to be used countywide or staff. And it's not,
Right.
it's not a, I mean, we talk about rebating 20,000 homes. They can only be in the footprint. So essentially you can't have a countywide program because
You wouldn't be able to have something countywide. It's got to be fairly narrow and specific to match that low income footprint, the projects that are occurring on that, if they're implementation. So it is a way to get some funding into Larimer, Boulder, Jeffco, and Douglas. I've seen polygons in each of these counties that would work. But you got to see if you have a project that can fit in with that polygon. That's probably how our assets will work with you on the Front Range. But no, they wouldn't be excluded, but it will be a harder path to navigate, you know, yes.
right. And we don't have, I'm not talking about forestry projects like a fuel break. I'm talking about countywide programs that impact multiple neighborhoods and communities. So anyway, it's a little different. I think the congressional intent, I mean, we do a lot of work with Nagoose and Hickenlooper and Bennett in terms of policy. We understand that there's a lot of congressional intent to put money into low-income communities, but the fact that none of CWDG, and I've seen some of the grants, can touch a polygon that's not a low income, I don't think that's been the case. And I don't know if that's really the intent. But that's fine. If that's how you're doing it, I mean, we won't apply. But that excludes a lot of folks in terms of the entire country.
Well, it excludes the Front Range in Colorado, but most of the rest of
Well,
the
Eagle
state.
County and Summit County have some wealth, and there's a lot.
Well, right. I
That's
think
fine.
we've looked at, you know, places like Los Animas, Huerfano, those kind of counties, Castillo, Conejos, they never are able to compete with our regular grant program. So this is the first time in my career I've seen some investment outside of the Front Range into the rest of Colorado. And that's, I think, meeting the congressional intent here. So.
Yeah, it's not a question of priority, it's a question of exclusivity. But yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. There's a couple more questions coming in the chat. There's a couple of things kind of as to where to find these resources. So I did want to point out that we will share the slides and that has we will be able to get the match calculator in there, as well as there was another question looking for where we find the underserved in a couple of places. So wildfirerisk.org and the climate and environmental justice screening tools that are listed in the slides that we will share out. And then we probably only have time for one more in here, working with, Brian, thanks for adding this one in the chat. Is CSFS the absolute gatekeeper on whether a proposal gets submitted or not? If we still feel we have a strong proposal, but CSFS does not agree, are we out of luck?
No, thanks for the question, Brian. How it's been, you know, how I've researched what our role is and what the U.S. Forest Service role is. In reality, I can't say that you can't apply. What I'm trying to accomplish, though, is I think the majority of applications in round 1 and 2 were never going to be competitive, and folks wasted their time writing those and developing them. We're hoping to make sure we're guiding folks to show which ones would be competitive and where it's worth spending your time developing the proposal. We wouldn't be not applying based on how strong the proposal is or not at that point. The things I'm more interested in are things like, are the targets attainable? If you're going to say you're going to treat 10,000 acres and I don't think that's attainable, that's where we're going to have a problem if we go to award that document and then we actually have to accomplish what we said, you know, in the grant. So no, it's not that we would exclude folks from applying, but we're hopefully going to really screen you well. The other service I'm going to offer for folks, you know, if they want it, is that I can score these in about 10 minutes to 15 minutes after you've written them and you've had edits and others from our assets. I'm one of the top scorers that for hardness in CWDG. So if I'm able to give you something closer to a favorable score, that may give you some confidence or show you how much work you might have to do to get it up closer to where that funding score is. But no, I'm not going to not allow you to apply. What really I want is that you've worked with our assets before I give you that key for application upload.
Yeah.
that's more the critical piece. We had a lot of awards from round 2 where they did not work with us in any way, and we are having major problems with one of them in particular, trying to get that awarded. And if we would have been involved in that development phase, we wouldn't be encountering those hurdles. Does that answer your question?
Yep, makes sense. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
So, Julie, you can say this too. We are at time, and there's some other really good questions, and I would say we could just leave the chat open for a couple minutes here so we can capture those as well afterward. And turn it over to Julie to close this out. And thank you, Chad and Janae and the whole team for being here to answer questions. Julie, did you have anything else to close out?
No, I just thanks so much, Chad and team, for helping us wade through all the nuances of CWDG. Super helpful for me coming into this new myself. So, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We're always here if you need additional help. Have a great afternoon and enjoy that pie, right?
I do want to say a few things, Julie. I do want to commend Janae Malpas for making the PowerPoint and FACO for getting this meeting set up and organizing all this stuff. That's a lot that you guys have taken on to do it. Appreciate getting the platform and the access. And again, watch for the NOFO coming out around late November, early December, and you'll hear more from Fire Adapted Colorado and State Forest Service about kind of our procedures for how to contact these assets once the NOFO is open.
Great. Thanks so much, everybody.